When it comes to photography, we focus a lot on taking the actual photo itself, the subject, the lighting, the composition, but that's just the beginning. Another one of the most important and transformative aspects is post-processing. And that's why I'm super excited to be partnering with Capture One to show you how I edit my images as a fashion and portrait photographer. I am a ride or die Capture One user. I've been using it every day for the last maybe 5 years now. And for me, it's an essential part of my workflow. But they've just released a brand new version, Capture One 23. And if you want to check it out, I've got a 20% discount code for the first 100 users. It's super limited, so make sure you check it out in the description below. So let's jump in. I've got a brand new session here, and I'm going to start by importing some images. So I'm going to go to File, and then Import Images. And up here, I'm going to go Import From. And I've got some photos that I took in Paris. So I'm going to review these for import. So there's 792 images here that I took during a shoot in Paris, and we shot about 3 looks. And some of the shots were like quick, like shots as she was walking and stuff. So there's quite a few pictures here. So first thing I'm going to do, and this is actually a new feature in Capture One 23, is culling. So I have nearly 800 images here. I've got 792, and I don't want to import all of these at once because it might just be too many to sort through. So there's this new feature in Capture One 23 called culling, which basically allows you to organize your photos into groups before you even import them into Capture One. And it does this using a sort of AI technology to identify photos that look similar to each other in some way. So it might be a similar pose from the model or like a similar backdrop. It sort of collates those into groups that you can then sort through and find the photos that you want to import. So you can see on the left, this tab here called Group Overview. If I click Enable Groups, it enables this similarity slider here. And this basically allows you to group your photos based on similarity. So depending on how similar you want them, you can be quite broad of your selection or quite specific. So I'm going to slide this up to around 60%. And what that will do is sort of group photos that look similar to each other. This group has 1 photo, this group has 13, this group has 5, and all of the photos within these groups will be quite similar to each other. So if I click on this group here, you can see, okay, I've got these photos, okay, she's sitting on this sort of fence type thing, they're all in this area. But then if I come down to this group, you can see all these shots are quite similar. And if I come over to this one, you know, all of these are sort of grouped together in this area where she's leaning on this pole. So it's really smart in the way that it reviews the photos and then sort of groups them together just by looking at them and seeing what's similar within the photos themselves. So if I drag this slider further up to maybe 90%, it's going to create lots of like smaller groups that are very close together and less of a broad selection. So it's just giving me like these 2, which are very similar, or these 3, for example, which are very similar. So you can sort of play around with this, and this just makes it quicker to sort of review your photos, select the ones you want and import them into Capture One. So I'm going to go ahead and select some of my favorites and then import them into my session. So now that I've got my images imported, I can now start playing around and start getting the look that I want from these images. I want to go for like more of a warm tone, remove some of the blues, add a bit of grain, make it feel a bit more sort of cinematic, filmic, that kind of vibe. So the first thing I want to do is actually adjust my white balance because it was like a cloudy day, but I want this to feel a bit more warm. So I'm going to adjust my white balance. I'm probably going to bring it up to about maybe 6,200. Because I shot this raw, I can sort of play around with my white balance and my dynamic range and stuff like that. So it's a decent exposure. It could be a little bit dark on the face. So I'm going to just actually bring my exposure up a little bit. So I'm kind of happy where this is in terms of white balance and exposure. And what I actually want to do now is apply this to the rest of the images in the set so that they feel really cohesive. So as you can see, because we were shooting on location, we've got a few different spots. Like this location, it's a lot brighter over here. And then when we come down here, it's quite dark because we were in sort of in between streets, in between buildings, so it got a lot darker. Now I could just edit this image completely and create a style and then apply that style as like a preset to all of the images. But the issue when you do that is sometimes when you apply a preset to a batch of images, some look better than others. It suits some more than others because the preset doesn't take into account exposure and the white balance of the image. It just sort of applies the same thing to all of them. But what I'm going to do in Capture One 23 is actually use this new feature called Smart Adjustments. So what this feature does is that you can set an image as a reference image and then select all your others and apply it, and it will basically get the images quite uniform in terms of exposure and white balance. So I'm gonna select this first image here as my reference. I'm gonna come down to Smart Adjustments, press Set as Reference, and then I'm gonna select the rest of the images in the set and click Apply. It's tried to make all these images look more uniform. So you can see before and after. You can see that's what that looked like before, and this is what it looks like now. So what that's done is it's given all of these images sort of like a uniform base that I can now go in and make tweaks to each of them and create the kind of look and style that I'm going for. So back to my first image, we're gonna make some more adjustments to this. So first thing I wanna do is desaturate this image quite a lot actually. I'm gonna bring my desaturation down to maybe around -25. Might go a little bit further down to maybe -30. And then I'm gonna come down to curves. Now this is where I tend to play around with the highlights and shadows and add some contrast to the image. So I'm going to lift the shadows very slightly at the base and then bring a bit more depth in here. And I want like the highlights of her face to pop a bit more. So you can see I wanna go in this sort of area and just bring that up. I might lift this a little. I don't want it to be too contrasty, so I'm gonna lift this up slightly. And then I wanna bring the highlights down at the very top, which is like the sky and things like that. I wanna sort of crush those highlights a little bit. It's just the sort of aesthetic that I like to go for in my images. So now I've played around with the curves, I've got it to a place I'm quite happy with, and you can see, if I click on here, you can see the before and the after that sort of had on the images. It's quite subtle, but I just added a little bit more contrast and then lifted the shadows in some areas as well. I can see that the sky is quite overexposed here, so I'm gonna bring down my highlights a little bit to bring some of that detail back in the sky. And I'm also gonna come down to clarity because I want this to have like a slightly softer look to it. It feels very digital, it feels quite like sharp at the moment, and I want it to be a little bit softer. So I'm gonna come down to clarity, and I'm actually going to reduce the clarity to maybe about -30 should be good. And that's just kind of taken the edge off a little bit and sort of flattened it slightly. I always want to add a bit of grain, so I'm going to come over to Refine, and I'm going to go down to Film Grain, and I'm going to bring this up to like 40. And you can see it's just giving it like that sort of grainy look. It's giving the image a bit more texture. So now I've made those adjustments, I want to play around with the color a little bit more. I really want this to feel very warm, and the way I'm going to do that is remove a lot of the blues and the greens out of the image. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the blues on the color editor here, and I'm just going to desaturate the blues. And this is going to just make sure that there's no like blues in the blacks and the shadows. I want this image to basically be warm tones and then black. So I'm going to remove the blues, and I'm also going to do this sort of teal-ish color as well. And I'm also going to reduce saturation of the greens a little bit. And also warm up those greens. I see I've got some trees in the back there. I want to like make that slightly warmer green. So I'm going to just adjust the hue of that green a little bit there. Now I'm also going to come down to my color balance, which is where I can play around with shadows, midtones, and highlights. And I'm going to add bit more of an orangey tone to the shadows. And this is where you can really see it sort of coming to life, and it's giving it that tone that I really want. And I'm gonna do the same in the highlights. This is gonna warm up like the sky and some areas on her skin and things like that. Add in that same like similar orangey yellowy tone. Now I'm kind of happy with this so far, but there's a few things that are distracting me. There's still this kind of tealy yellow on these scooters, and I want to get rid of that. There's also this bus in the background which has like a teal turquoisey color. And the other thing that's bothering me is this pharmacy sign here. Now, if you've been to Paris, there's just tons of pharmacies everywhere, and they all have these neon green signs. So I want to remove that. There's also a McDonald's sign here, so I might play around with that as well. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to brush this on using the mask tool. So I'm going to come up here to the brush tool and go on draw mask. And I'm actually going to just draw on this area first. So I want to get rid of this sort of like tealy blue color. So I've drawn that on there, and I can come over to the color editor again. You can see I'm on a new layer, and I'm gonna just reduce that color palette there. And I can still see some of it, so there might be some in the blues too. And I'm gonna reduce the greens as well. And then also the yellows, because I wanna get rid of that distracting yellow color there. And I also wanna apply the same thing to this bust in the background because it's the same color. Nice. So now I'm gonna create another layer, and I'm just gonna reduce the saturation of this pharmacy sign as well. So I can just come in here and draw all over that, and then select the greens and reduce that as well. Pretty much take it down all the way. I don't think we need to really see it. Let's just refine that a little bit. Okay, so I've gotten rid of the distractions. I'm sort of happy where this is at. I'm just gonna play around with it a little bit more. So this is the before and after of the adjustments that we've made, and I'm happy with how it's looking. What I wanna do now is save this as a style so that I can apply it to the rest of the images in the set. So I'm gonna go up to Adjustments, Styles, Save Custom Style, and I'm gonna get rid of the layers because I don't want those masks that I made. Those were for this image specifically, but I don't wanna apply the same masks to every image. So I'm gonna get rid of the layers, and I'm also gonna get rid of exposure and also the white balance, because we already did our exposure and white balance with the smart adjustment, so I don't want that in this style. So I'm gonna press save, and I'm gonna call this Paris Streets. I'm gonna save that. So now I can come to this image here, the next image, and I can go to Style, Custom Styles, and click on Paris Streets. And it's gonna give this image obviously the same sort of look and feel. So you can see here that all the images now feel really cohesive. They feel similar to each other, but what really made a big difference there was using the smart adjustments, because if I was to just make the style and apply it to all the images without adjusting them first, they would feel all over the place. You know, some of these images are darker, like this image in this doorway, for example, is a lot darker. This image on the street, you can see before just how sort of dark it was and a lot more cool toned. But by applying the smart adjustments across all the images, I've made them feel really cohesive. So this is great if you're working with a big batch of images, or if you're doing something like shooting lots of different models in different locations, or if you're doing something like wedding photography, event photography, where you're working with different lighting conditions, but you want the images to still feel very cohesive. This is a great way to do that, and it makes it so much quicker and so much easier. So if we do some before and afters on this, you can see that I've just given it that feel that I was talking about. A lot more warm toned, not quite like sepia, but I wanted it to feel I wanted it to feel warm, but still desaturated, and get rid of some of those blue tones and like bluish shadows. And then all I'll do from here is kind of go in and maybe like play around with the crops of the images a little bit. If I'm putting on Instagram, I'd typically go for a 4:5 crop. So that is a quick overview of how I post-process using Capture One, as well as some of the new tools that they've added into Capture One 23. Sometimes while I'm shooting, I have a vision in my head of how I want this final image to look, but you can't always do that in camera. So having these really powerful tools to do it in post-processing is really great, and it can completely change the look and feel of your images. If you're new to Capture One, or you just want to try the new version, Capture One 23, make sure you check out the link in the description and use my code to get 20% off. I've also made a few other videos about using Capture One, about how to edit faster, and also how to use styles in a bit more detail. So if you want to check those out, they'll be on my channel as well. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more photography content, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.